This is not past, this is the future. That's why it's been flipped to called present imperfections. The key is to focus on those imperfections and not to worry about glossing everything over and making everything perfect. And I think a lot of people are realizing that.
Welcome to Get the Picture, a photography learning podcast. I'm Brad Sigal, your host. I'm excited about the conversation with today's guest, who I've known since the late 1980s. I spoke with him earlier in a different podcast I did, and now I'm excited to catch up and talk about some of his current photography-related activities and opinions. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me for Get the Picture. Pat Graham, welcome.
Yeah, it's great to be here again, Brad. I always love speaking with you about photography stuff and just our lives in general. So thanks for having me again.
Definitely. And there's some very timely stuff that I'm excited to talk about today. But before we get into that, why don't we just start with who are you and what's your connection to photography?
My connection to photography goes back to my connection to music. Early on, I had a love for music and punk rock music in particular. And my other love was photography because I love looking at pictures of musicians performing. And so I thought, well, I want to do that too. So that became my kind of obsession. That was in high school many, many years ago. From that point, I continued to be a part of a music scene and activism scene, political scene that went along with it. Ended up moving to Washington, D.C. from Wisconsin, where I grew up, to live in an activist house called Positive Force, which I lived with you at, I believe, Brad, or I was there before. When I first visited Positive Force, you were definitely there, and that's when we became friends. So that was, the early 90s, and I met a lot of influential people, kind of changed my life, and along the way, I kept doing photography. My photos started being used by musicians and bands, and I started to work with different zines, and I did a little bit of journalism, interviewing bands and things like that. Ended up going on tour with one of my old roommates from Positive Force, who's named Isaac Brock, and he had just formed a band called Modest Mouse. And so I toured with them and documented them for well over 10 years. From that, there was other tours, other bands I went on tour with, and I then ended up moving over to the UK, moving over to London, formed an art gallery there with my partner at the time, and ran that. And that was a gallery based a lot around the connection of USA musicians and artists, and a little bit of political thrown in there as well. So we did exhibitions with G. Vaucher from Crass and Tim Kerr and all sorts of exhibitions. And I also continued my work there. In the background, did a few photography books. As time went on, I made other professional connections, friendships. Most recently, the last 5 years, I did a lot of work with Johnny Marr, who I met through Modest Mouse. My last book, or it was his book on Thames and Hudson, which is 90% my photos. It's basically a biography of his life through his instruments. So I spent a lot of time photographing all of his instruments. Recently, I've relocated back to the U.S. I'm living now back in Washington, D.C. I was drawn back here just for the same reason I came here originally, which was community, friendship, activism, what's going on. So that's where I'm at today. Since I've hit the ground here, I've been working with a few different people on some projects right now, which we'll talk about today. I've got a exhibition that I curated with a friend who runs Moments Festival in Spain, and I've brought that exhibition here. We'll talk more about that. So that's a little bit of overview. It's funny when you ask that question, it's hard to summarize everything, and it also makes me feel old because I'm like, oh yeah, there's that thing, and that was 30 years ago. But anyways, yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Well, and since you've been doing photography your whole life, it's really telling your life story, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And didn't Didn't you also do teaching as well, like at the university level,
Yeah, yeah,
photography?
yeah. See, that's it's like my mind. I will say also that I am not proud of this. I mention this to a lot of people because I think people don't talk about this enough. But as photographers and creatives, like I discovered this years ago, but it makes sense. I have ADHD and I also have dyslexia, so like I'll get on one track and forget the other track. But yes, I taught in the UK for a place called British Academy of Photography, and I've also taught other in the UK. I taught some media, and I do currently teach and I do workshops and educational related things. I'm all about sharing my knowledge with other people. And actually, the current exhibition I've got curated here, there's a lot of different workshops going on. And if you need a photography teacher, I'm here. I'm available. So
Everybody listening, got to hit up Pat if you need a
yeah.
photography teacher. So,
Yeah.
so you've been doing photography a long time at a lot of different levels, from DIY hole-in-the-wall punk clubs to arenas that bands are playing in to university classrooms. And you've done that through a lot of real changes in technology for photography. What is it about photography that keeps you engaged despite all these changes?
I think it's the initial thing about photography that drew me in. Like the first thing that drew me in was like, being in that dark room, in the high school dark room, and to chemicals and taking a picture and seeing it develop in the tray. Of course, it's not like that now, but it's a similar feeling. It's like going out and photographing, the protest or a gig or whatever it is. It's like my contribution, and it's the way that I feel a part of something. And I think that's underlying. I think that's what really drew me to it and still draws me to it, and I like, times technically have changed. I've shot when I first started, there was no such thing as digital. It's like, what is that, and now we've got digital and there's a lot more people taking photographs, especially like, so if we use like concert photography as an example, there's some incredible gig photographers out there, and there's so many people doing great work. And I still do that, and it's not my main thing, but I find if I'm at a gig and it's a really good band, I feel just drawn to photograph them, even if it's just with my phone or my camera or whatever. And I wouldn't do anything necessary with the photos, especially when I know there's like half a dozen other people around me that are like, really fast on it. But I guess my point is, it's just it's the collaboration and feeling a part of it. I never was a musician, but I love and respect what musicians do. And maybe I'm not, like some kind of outspoken activist that could stand up to the police or fascists or, go to Congress and be very articulate about how I feel, but I know that I can photograph what I'm seeing and what I want to communicate through photography. And I think that's also a part of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. Thanks for sharing that. So why don't we get into then the exhibition that you mentioned? You curated an exhibition that's on display in the Washington, D.C. area this summer called Present
Yeah.
Imperfection. It's
Yeah.
focused on instant photography, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The exhibition originally happened in 2017. Was semi-curated and produced by my friend Juan, who he runs Staff Magazine, and also he produces and runs Moments Festival in Malaga, Spain, which is spread all throughout Spain. He's just like an incredible organizer, positive person. And so he brought me to Spain. Well, I had this idea. I've had a love of Polaroid photography way back when I first discovered it in the early 90s. So at a point in the early 90s, you could go into a thrift store and get a Polaroid camera for like, $1 or something. And some people in the music scene discovered, hey, we can get these old Polaroid cameras and, go get film stills. So I started doing that and taking pictures, and it evolved into, I had this idea to take one Polaroid every single day wherever I was, and then just write the date on it. And that would be a way to practice, and also just to does document my life, I guess, in the style of like what Andy Warhol was doing. And this is pre-digital, so no one was really doing it that, some people did, but not that I knew about. And from that, the photos could be as boring as like a bunch of smashed pretzels on the street in DC to, being in Eastern Europe with the makeup while I was on tour. So I did that for about 2 years. And also I was working at a camera store, so I had a lot of access to film. And I ended up with like thousands of Polaroids, different formats. And other people, I met my partner at the time, she was somewhat into Polaroid too. And then we ended up doing a exhibition called Past Perfect, which was based on that work and kind of evolved from there. But from doing that, I just realized there was a lot of other people like me who had a love of photography. And the thing with the Polaroid, I'm calling it Polaroid, but we'll just say, as you said, it's like Kleenex or Band-Aid. There's other forms of, but at the time it was Polaroid. And the great thing about this and other projects I've done is it speaks to other people and then they can relate to it. Maybe they've done something similar. And then I noticed that a lot of people that I respect had done similar things. And that realizing that, I was like, well, I want to bring together an exhibition of all of this work, artists that I love and respect, basing it from what I had done, but seeing what other people had done. So we did the group show with, I did the group show with Juan. And it sat there, and it was a beautiful show. It was at a beautiful institution in Malaga, and it was really well done, and I was really proud of it. But I hadn't gotten a chance to bring it to the USA because Juan and I are trying to tour this show as well. So if anyone out there wants to bring the show to their town, it's on tour. It will be on tour, hopefully. So I had a great opportunity here in DC with the Friendship Heights Alliance, which is Friendship Heights is a neighborhood in DC that it's a great neighborhood. And it was affected, I think, a lot by the pandemic. So maybe things aren't as active and there's kind of a more available space, but now things are coming back. It's really a great location. It's on the border of Maryland, but there's literally a metro stop in the building where the show is that I'm having. And so long story short, I had the opportunity to put the show on here. I brought it back here and I've added some more DC related artists. And with this show, it's all always evolving. So there's always opportunity to add things. People come in, it's like, oh, I got these great shots. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, bring them down or, take more pictures. But that's the gist. And then as for content in the show, I said it's artists, friends, people that I worked with through other avenues or just having mutual respect for. Maybe I didn't know them, but I just contacted them because I love their work and I knew they'd done Polaroids. So for example, Danny Clinch, as we know, does amazing work, and he's the one that shot the iconic Polaroid of like Tupac, and other musicians. And so I got in touch with him, and so he's got to hit that Tupac shot and other pictures in the show. And then there's Craig Stesick, who was the founder of helped found Dogtown, is very vital in like the whole look of that whole early kind of skateboard scene out there. And Thomas Campbell, and then just different artists that had that kind of look. But then at the same point, I think it's really important, there's other photographers in the show that maybe aren't very well known, but they've got a lot to say and they've got some really great imagery. So that's, so you got the hook and then hopefully discover something new. And, so there's that. And then it's also a show, I wanted to make it very accessible. So it wouldn't be like you have to understand skateboard culture, music culture. There's a lot of content that could speak to anyone who just likes good photos. And then as for a techie, nerdy photography thing, which I can talk about because we're photographers and you guys want to hear about that, is there's so many different formats and you can really see the evolution of instant photography in the show, so we're starting from Polaroid, going back to the pack film where you peeled it apart and all of that. Within that, we've got 4x5 format, 8x10. I've got, a series of 8x10 Polaroids that Jason Lee did. Jason Lee was a skateboarder, is also an actor, photography does some great work. And so I've got some of his work, and you've got transfers, SX70, so all the different, I could go in, talk a lot about that as well. And then coming up to the current situation with instant, which is you've got some Polaroid, which we can get into what that means. And there's also Fuji, which is really, in my opinion, kept it alive when it comes to accessibility, that kind of feeling of watching it develop. And see, this is the other thing about Polaroid that really drew me in is it's the essence of what I loved about photography in the beginning, which is like you take this photo and then you have it in the tray and you see it come up right in front of you, and that's kind of magical. And the magic about the Polaroid instant photography is that you don't have to go into a dark room. It's all of a sudden it's there, and you can show it to the person you're with, or it's in the room, so it's speaks to that. And we think about the daguerreotypes, Victorian, that was the original instant photo, I guess, but it involved a lot of toxic chemicals. But yeah, I could go on and on about this thing. I just think it's like there's so many like facets to it.
So you said where it is. Can you give more detail, like when people can see it, how long it's going to be there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like I said, yeah, it's in Washington D.C. It's if you can get to the Metro Friendship Heights, it's pretty much in the it's right above the Friendship Heights, on the Red Line, really easy to get to. It's going to be here till at the end of September, possibly further, but at the moment we're going to the end of September. And we've got workshops planned, artist talks, and other little events going on through there. The current schedule for me here is I'm calling it a live lab, and that's I'm in the gallery on Fridays and Saturdays, and this is like confirmed hours, and people come in and we chat about photography, and I've got different instant printers here, so you don't have to have a instant camera even to enjoy the instant photographs. So I've been exploring the process of the Fuji Instax wide printer and how you can print from your phone. But anyways, I'm here on Friday and Saturdays for sure, but I'm telling people also, I'm pretty much here every day, all day, up in the afternoon, early evening, because as I said, it's like I've had this great opportunity for me. It's like I'm treating it as an artist in residence. So I'm doing my work here. People drop by and come on in. And if you want to confirm I'm going to be here, you can reach out to me on my Instagram or, other ways. But I'm mostly here.
Amazing. So what's the reaction been so far to the exhibition?
It's been really good. And it's been a combination of things so there's the people who are like, oh, I can't believe you have this particular photographer here, and it's so amazing to see these original, prints or original photographs of my favorite photographer, this content. And then there's also been the reaction of like, oh yeah, I have Polaroids, or how do you do that? Or that still is around. Like, what can I do? So there's like all these different things to talk about, and explore, because I've got a few cameras here on hand. So it's been a really positive reaction. And, with that, so the other thing I wanted to say about the show is also, it's kind of, there's a heavy base on the physical object as a print or as a Polaroid or as an instant photograph. And you can come to that in various ways. So one of the things I've been doing here and talking a lot about as well is like, say you only have one photograph or one, Polaroid or whatever. I'm thinking about, using modern technology or treating that as a print. So I've got I've got photos in here that were literally little iZone photos, but if you scan them, and then you can print them and blow them up huge as this object, and then you show the border and you show the beautiful kind of decay, the bends in the actual physical object, but it's blown up big so you can see it. And then people have been really surprised, like, oh, that's from a Polaroid? I didn't know you could do that. So, for me, it's about looking in the past at what we had, but also then using now technologies to kind of bring it forward and explore it further.
So I'm curious, would you place your focus on Polaroids or instant photography, like in this broader context right now where technology with photography has become so good that you can create basically flawless images and,
Mm-hmm.
after you edit them in Lightroom or Photoshop. And now even with AI, you can just generate flawless images out of thin air or out of stealing other people's work, I guess. But like, is the imperfection, the capturing of something real and spontaneous from that's momentary, like with the Polaroid, is that some of the I don't know what drags your attention to or interest in
Yeah,
Polaroids? It's something maybe like the last refuge from the relentless algorithm.
exactly. Yeah, and that's why, that's kind of where the title of the show came, because originally I'd done this thing called Past Perfect, but this is not past, this is the future, and so that's why it's been flipped to called Present Imperfection. So that is the key, is to focus on those imperfections and not to worry about glossing everything over and making everything perfect. And I think a lot of people are realizing that, and it began, a few years back when everyone, there was this whole thing with music. There's kind of for me, there's a music photography kind of comparison. So with musicians and people who record music, it's like, oh, analog, you need that crisp, warm sound. So for, film photography or Polaroid or instant photography, it's that slight, that grain, or that, as it's called, noise or bokeh or whatever you want to call that terminology, that it fights against the absolute perfect exposed photo. And I do believe that's catching on, and you can see it catching on in younger generations, because they're actually purchasing little digital cameras away from their phones. They're looking for digital cameras from, say, 2009 that are only like 2 megapixels, but they've got this kind of not perfect feeling, and that's the idea behind the present imperfection. And that, to me, relates more to us as humans, because we're always evolving. We don't evolve into some, like, as we grow older, we're not like glossing over, we're showing signs of wear and tear and age. And that's the whole idea, a lot of the idea, the concept behind this show. So, for example, when I used to do the Polaroid a day while I was on tour with musicians, I would do a little ongoing gallery, be in this shitty van. I'd take a Polaroid and they'd tape it up on the wall. So we'd have a little mini gallery of the Polaroids, like duct taped or whatever, just stuck up, and then we'd drive around the country. And then I'd get back and I'd still have those, and there would be that residue from the tour on the photo. And that's the imperfection, but that's the historical element, and that brings it all together. So yes, and it's kind of the opposite of digital. But that said, I'm about accessibility. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, well, I wasn't around in the 90s, or I don't have a perfect Polaroid camera, instant camera. But, things like this thing here, or these little printers. I went to some gigs recently. I saw the Subhumans play, and I was blown away. They were my favorite band. They really informed who I became, and known them over the years, hadn't seen them, but I took a bunch of pictures, and I came back and I printed them as Polaroids, and it just seemed really fitting, so.
Mm.
Yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, yeah, that's a good point. There's so much in the show. It's like, yeah, of course, that's the main basis, with the imperfection and the present imperfection. That's the theory behind it. So.
I love that. Yeah, and like when I go to more DIY punk shows these days, and there's a lot of people taking pictures, and of course you have everybody pulling out their phone to record some video at some point during the show, but the people there with cameras, I would say a large number of them are there with film cameras, or like you were talking about the point and shoots from the early
Mm.
2000s. And old camcorders, young people today are drawn back to those imperfect technologies because they do capture, I think, something more
They
human, more
do.
real.
Hmm. More organic. It's more of the essence of how we see things. And, but that said, it's I think it's just capturing something. I've seen other, photographers can easily get caught up in like, oh, I've got to have this lens or I've got to have this camera or, the new one came out that's like 10,000 megapixels or whatever the hell it is, and that's nice, but that's not the main thing. You can have a crappy camera, whatever, as long if you've got some kind of physical thing that you can play with. To me, the one exciting thing about AI in the future is that you can take that thing and then really bring it, forward and do something with it. So if you've got a negative that was really bad because you didn't know what you were doing, it's underexposed, but you can see it was a great shot, you still have an opportunity to do something with, and that's because you had that physical thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, AI is something I wanted to talk a little bit about. So why don't we do that now since you raised it?
Okay. Yeah.
AI obviously is changing photography in many ways and will continue to do so. There's a lot of stuff on the back end that maybe people seeing photos don't see. Like now in Lightroom, so many of the things you can do are AI in terms of object removal or,
Hmm.
select the sky and adjust the sky, things like that. They're starting to put AI all throughout the editing process in Lightroom to where it gets harder and harder to avoid, even if you want to. And not to mention just image generation using AI. So a lot of people, for I think good reason, react really harshly against AI in photography. And you're someone who a lot of your most famous images are analog, shot on film, not
Hmm.
even digital, let alone AI. Um, can you talk about your thoughts on AI in
Yeah.
photography?
Yeah. I think I've only ever posted one AI image. I think it was some kind of joke image about the Washington Monument and something to do with anarchy or something. um, but besides that, no,
Well, maybe
nothing.
I'm mixed up.
Yeah,
Okay,
but it's like I think.
maybe you just told me about something you experimented with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the one thing which I just we were talking about a second ago, which is I like the fact that I could take maybe I've got some images that were blurry, or maybe I've got some images that were they were they were hard to see, but I knew what they were and they were important. And in that way, I think AI, like, say, Photoshop, or if we just kept going back and back in the history of photography, if we go back to using a darkroom, maybe people don't realize, but it was a is a physical skill, but it was also a technical thing. If you had someone who could be a master printer, they could take a negative that you couldn't see and they could make it really beautiful. And to me, the same thing is with AI now. You can take your negative or something and emphasize it and bring it out. And I'm all for that. And I'm all for using, AI as a tool for, say, organization or a tool for, for me with my dyslexia, my ADHD, there's been a lot of things with AI that have really helped me out a lot. But that said, I have a fear and question, and I'm aware of what can be done with it, and unfortunately, what is already being planned and done with it due to, living in a capitalist type world. Everything's got to be, something to, you take over or sell. It's always about selling. So those sort of things make me wary, and I obviously don't support that. But the reality is that AI is here, it's not going anywhere, and we can fight against it. But I think it's good to understand it, and I think it's good to use it to your advantage, maybe to fight against it, maybe to advance your own life so you can fight against something that you want to fight against. Because I don't think it's very helpful to just say, oh, yeah, it sucks. I hate it. I'm not going to get involved with that. Because, yeah, I mean, we feel that way. but we can't deny it. It's there, and I try to look at things through the lens of the history of photography and art. When photography was first invented, painters were, like, what is this? This is not real art. You didn't draw this and all of that. And it's another tool. It's another tool to express yourself and to further. And I would hope, I know that it won't always be used in a good way, but that's all we can do. And, I'm well aware of the environmental issues and all of that. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think, I do know that it has helped me, and I would encourage, people to use it against the system. Brief examples, say as a photographer, someone sends you over some kind of contract with a bunch of fancy words that you don't understand. You're like, what the hell does this mean? It's like, AI, explain this to me, what this really means. Bam, it knows and it can tell you. It's like, oh, that's what it's saying. Oh, someone's offering me, $25 for usage on a photo. Oh no, that's not, no, ask for this, So little things like that. When it comes to image creation, I've used it to create a couple images of a cat that's very close to me to make it look like it was the commander of the National Guard and things like that, but nothing too serious. I've explored, a little bit of post-processing, and I think one last thing I'll say about it, which I think is key with any usage of AI, is us as photographers, I still think educating yourself as a photographer, the processes, the technical aspects of it, be it taking the picture, processing the picture, that is still important, because the more articulate you are, say if you're using AI to do Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever, because it's going to get to a point, it's already getting there, where you're going to be able to open up an image and say, okay, I need this. I need to, boost the shadows. I want to tweak the dehaze a little bit. It's got to be an output of 300 DPI, 1900 on the long, whatever. All those technical terms, AI knows. And if you know the technical terms, you can get the most out of it and tell it what to do. But if you say, this doesn't quite look right, can you make it look like this? It's going to be more difficult. So it still is important. Humans are still needed. We're still needed, and we always will be, I think, for this type of thing. So I don't know if that helps, and hopefully people will not be like, fuck you, Pat, AI, blah, blah, it's destroying. It is. It's bad. I mean, there is some really evil aspects of it, and we need to keep it in check if we can.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I've thought about doing a discussion, bringing in a few photographers to have like a discussion about it that gets into these nuances, because I agree with you. I don't think it's black and white, to use a photography term, I guess. I think that, I agree with you that the profit motive is what corrupts everything. And then it's like, use as much water as you need so that these companies can make billions more dollars, as
and
opposed to
destroy the environment and the communities around them. And then we haven't even touched on the AI, the whole copyright issue and all of that, the way that, and this is, I guess, when it comes to AI or music or anything else, I have this conversation with friends often, is that it's this whole like decentralization of like one group or one person becomes in control of everything. So like, we don't need stock photographers because we have stolen all of their shit and we do our own shit, or we don't need this because we control it now with all the artists, like musicians, a good example. It's like live photography now, and a lot of bands can only, they struggle to earn money because of Spotify or whatever. So they've got to go on tour, and then concert prices are super high because somebody's got to earn some money. And then, it's just all going back to, this whole control thing. But,
Yeah. And in terms of the things you were talking about, the things that on the back end can help you be more organized, can help you cull through, like you shoot photos at a wedding, you shoot a couple thousand photos, you can use AI to cull through those in minutes when it would have taken me 8 hours before. That's actually
Mm-hmm.
useful, and that's not to me the same as image generation that's basically stealing other people's work to
Exactly.
then
Yeah,
generate something.
there are different aspects, yeah, for sure. So we can use AI to be more efficient ourselves and also to stand up for ourselves and all of that. But it's a fine line. I thought of this catchphrase. I'm going to say it, and then you'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's right." Um, it goes to punk, right? So I realize that like occasionally I'll use AI to try to figure out contracts, and then you send it over, you do it, and then you realize that the company is also using AI to do the same thing to you. So it's AI against AI. So
Yeah.
everything has become, it was I against I, now it's AI against AI. It's like, oh, my AI says this, click, 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 and then it's like, okay, oh, yes, hi, Pat. Yeah, but you realize you're talking to an AI as well.
Yeah, I did an interview with John Paymer, who does product photography, and he was
Yeah,
talking about his thoughts on low-end product photography may not exist anymore, at least not in the way it does now because of AI.
yeah,
But other types of higher-end or more artistic product photography, there will always be a place for. Um,
yeah.
and because you need that human creativity to create
Mm-hmm.
something that hasn't existed before, because AI can only know things that have already existed.
Exactly. Or you need the human creativity, or you need a human director. So it may be that, the product photographer now has to really knows their stuff, can direct the AI to do it the right way. But there's a fine line. It's just really it's gonna be tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to change the topic a little bit. You mentioned a minute ago in Washington, D.C., the National Guard. So one thing that I've noted that you've been posting a lot of photos and videos of over the recent months, years now, is that the Trump administration started the unprecedented federal military occupation of Washington, D.C. quite a while ago now, and you started
Hmm.
posting images from that and video of National Guard soldiers patrolling the streets. This is really unprecedented, and the protests against that. And you've continued to document that, even though, as people move on to the next outrage and atrocity. So the media attention to the military occupation of DC hasn't been there, but the occupation actually continues. What's that been like to document the National Guard presence in DC, and what kind of response have you gotten from National
Yeah.
Guard members when you're trying to photograph them, or
Hmm.
and what have the protests been like?
Um, so yeah, when it comes to documenting, photographing the National Guard, I've been doing a little bit of that, but honestly, I'm out a lot with my partner Diane Krauthamer, who's a photographer, and she has been relentlessly photographing and filming the National Guard since this whole occupation kicked off in August of last year. And so I can give you, insight on my observations as to what I've experienced and the work that she's been doing. The thing that we've both noticed is that it's this evolution of, it's like subtle but not subtle. So when we first saw them on the streets of DC, it was quite shocking to be out and you're walking around and there's a full army soldier, staring at you. And that was one thing. They didn't have guns at that point. And then within a short time, they're carrying weapons, they're carrying guns and they're looking at you. And from that point, it's just kind of grown. There's more and more of them. So you'll get off the metro. And as you're going through the gate, you've got six armed soldiers, three on either side, just standing there looking at you. And it's also worth noting that they are actually, for the most part, doing nothing. It's this visual thing. And the way that, and then there's also these other huge kind of rallying events like the 4th of July. Diane and I went down and documented that whole thing, which included tons of National Guard, not only in DC. There's something like a dozen or more different authorities. So there's like the DEA, there's the Park Police, there's the IRS police, there's every single type of authority that the United States has can be seen on the streets of DC on a common day. Like Adams Morgan, here's a dozen DEA soldiers, and then on the sidewalk you've got 6 National Guard troops you're trying to get by. So it feels really intimidating, and it does feel quite occupying. The reactions from local people live here, like, what are you doing? And they're just walking around. They remind me of the way that one sees them working is, I don't know if you've ever had a job when you were like, say, a teenager or something, and you actually weren't doing anything at that job, but when the boss showed up, you were like, oh, I'm straightening something, I'm doing something. That's how this is, it's like, it's so cliche. But so Diane's been documenting that, and the evolution of her work is like, it's quite intimidating because it's all these usually white men with little mustaches and guns. And so she's been photographing from afar and kind of building a whole story and getting closer and closer, and then realizing that at the moment, fortunately, they're not really doing anything to people. There have been instances where they have. So you can get up in their face and photograph them, but they're obviously being told that the strategy that they have is to be like, they smile and they wave, and it comes across as kind of creepy, but that's their orders. They're like, we're here to help. But people are getting more and more frustrated, and they're calling them out, especially because it's starting to come out more that they're not dropping the crime. These troops are here by choice. They're being paid an average of $11,000 a month. There's a crisis when it comes to the economy and everything else here, and it's just so intimidating. They had Malcolm X Park. It's like is a park that I learned recently is federally owned, and so there was like a rally there. Like Pete Hegseth, the leader of defense, was there, just showed up one day with like 200 National Guard, and it felt like a Nazi rally or something in the middle of DC. And why were they there? That's nowhere near the Capitol or anything. It's like miles away, and it was just right in the middle of the community. So what's happening basically, in my opinion, is that, Trump is losing battles on all these other fronts. And unfortunately, since DC is not a state, he's able to kind of push it around a bit. And it's there. The experience is going back to the experience of photographing it and seeing it. It can be intimidating, but the more that you do it, the more it feels doable. Like I watch Diane do it, and I'm impressed, and sometimes I'll film her doing it just as a backup to make sure that they're not going to mess with her doing it, and we have more of a full documentation. But it is quite intimidating. The contrast to that is you will see people coming into DC, especially like, say, for the 4th of July or for the UFC fight, who are not from here. And they're all dressed up in USA #1 shirts, and they're like fist bumping the National Guard as they see them, like, yeah, thank you for your service and all this bullshit. And they don't live here. And I mean, my question to them is, if they woke up in their home on their street and they had armed soldiers out at their mailbox, would they be happy with that? I don't know. Maybe they would be, but it's quite scary. And I think that the rest of the country, the United States and the world, especially the US, they don't quite realize it because they don't see it. There's been some kickback in other states in the US, and they've got the guard removed, but they're still hanging. There's over 5,000 of them here right now. And that is bad enough. But on top of that, you've got DEA, IRS authority, like any kind of authority just out walking around chasing people. You'll have these caravans, Washington DC, like police, followed by vehicles with out-of-state plates and a duct tape over their plates, and those are like the ICE agents. And the DC police go around, they look for traffic stops, and then the ICE agents follow them, and then they jump out if they get the opportunity to, abduct people. So there's a lot going on. You could talk to Diane on a separate podcast, or just look at her work. You can see she's been documenting it, and it's important. And beyond that, there's a whole movement here about filming the police and filming the authorities and what they're doing, because, just one quick example. So I was out one time in Columbia Heights, and a woman was getting harassed because she used a child bus card on the bus or something, and they had like a dozen cops and federal authorities all surrounding this person, not arresting them right away, but just harassing them. And they're doing the same thing with, like, if someone has a can of beer or something, the Secret Service are being called in, and the National Guard are not arresting, but they're like looming around the background, and they're, and most of these guard they're from Republican states as well, and they don't even really know DC. They're just walking around cashing in. So yeah, that's
when I was in DC briefly last December and saw them right outside the metro station where I was, and then inside the metro station, and I did take some pictures from a distance, both in the metro station and outside, and then just saw them randomly on the streets in a little park where they were harassing somebody who appeared like they might be homeless. And I mean, obviously there's a whole history in the U.S. of genocide against Native people, of enslavement of whole populations, of all kinds of other things. So it's hard to say anything is unprecedented, but in modern U.S. history, an ongoing years-long military occupation of a major U.S. city is in recent times unprecedented. And
it is,
the fact that it's become not even news, it's like normalized, and that's the problem, right? And so that's where I think that the documentation that Diane's doing and that you're doing, I think, is really important. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing I'll say about it's like, I think that it is important, and it shows the rest of the U.S. what's happening. And that's kind of that's what drew me to Diane's work initially, because she was on the ground photographing and videoing things like this. But there is one group in Washington, D.C. called Free DC. So if you're interested, check out what they're posting, because they're starting to stick up, or they have been all along, but they're talking a lot more about it. And I think through talking about it through social media, and also just sharing the facts that it's like, it is not helping, it's very expensive, and it's meant as, this power play, and it goes against what is good, just because it's here in Washington, D.C., and people don't see it, and they're just kind of going about their business. So make yourself aware, especially if you're in the United States. So what's happening?
Yeah, thank you again for that work documenting it and keeping people aware of what's happening. I want to move on and talk about Jennifer Finch, but I'm going to preface it a little bit by saying last time we talked about photos taking on more meaning over time, especially when you have important images of someone who's passed away. And at that time that we talked, your photos of Modest Mouse's drummer, Jeremiah Green, that you have a lot of from touring with them, he had recently passed away, and as well as like Steve Albini. And, I guess maybe it's just a sign we're getting old, right? That more people we know are passing away. But it's also thinking about it in terms of photography. Jennifer Finch from the band L7 recently passed away from brain cancer, and you made one of the most iconic images of her back in 1992, which still circulates widely to this day on the internet and on shirts and stuff. Can you talk about that image and just maybe describe it a little bit and the context it was made in, and why you think it's had this life that and what it means that one of your photos is actually outliving the subjects in it?
Yeah. Well, that image where it happened, it was in April of 1992, and this group that we lived at and worked with, Positive Force, and also Rock for Choice, which is a group that I believe L7 founded, or they were heavily involved in. It's a group for, supporting pro-choice in the US and a woman's right to choose. And the show was aligned with a very large women's march on DC. It was a pro-choice march. And that show was a benefit for as a Rock for Choice show. And it was 2 nights. Fugazi was playing both nights. One night was L7, Fugazi, and Bikini Kill. And one night was Fugazi, Scrawl, and what was it? Yeah. Anyways, it was 2 nights. And for me, that was like, it was like all these bands I loved, right? As many people may know or may not know, Bikini Kill and L7, very feminist bands, called them, and Bikini Kill would start their show and say, all guys to the back, women up front, which myself being obviously not a woman, I felt a little bad about, but I made sure it was okay with my friends who were female around me, that it was okay I was there and they were in front of me, and the photos were going to be given to the bands. But anyways, that's another thing. So L7, I guess, I'll just tell you the story of the L7 part of that show. The whole show itself, and I thought a lot more about this after Jennifer passed recently. And it was, if there was one show that I photographed in my life that was so important to my career or to the photographs that I took or made, it was that show, because I also made some pictures of Bikini Kill that went on to be used everywhere, and Fugazi as well, and then L7. So L7 headlined, and they came out and they played, and they were incredible, and it was in a place called Sanctuary Theater in DC. It's one of the churches. So there's no like fancy stage lights. It was just like a couple of bulbs, and there was myself and maybe 3 or 4 other photographers, and this is film at the time. And I had the shot in front, and I talked about this before, but at the time my technique was to put the camera on B and then fire the flash off separately. So that would be when the photo would be taken, because the shutter would be open. So it was basically like dragging the shutter, but my weird made up technique of that. And at one point, so L7 was playing, I forget what song it was, but they had this dry ice come on the stage. So there's all this smoke on the stage, and then Slimestra Hyman, I think that's her name, but the woman, she's in gore usually, she comes out and she's just like covered in fake blood and all these spikes, and she's got these 2 flames and she's like waving them around. And at the time, L7 had just released Bricks Are Heavy, their album. The album cover art is like someone waving flames around. It's not her, but it was the same kind of look. She comes out, she's waving flames, and like Jennifer, Donita, all of L7, they're playing, and she's dancing around, and it's just like chaos, and there's all this like smoke everywhere. I had photographed L7 once before at a little club called OK's Corral in Madison, and that's where like Nirvana used to play when they recorded Nevermind. That was a big thing, and it was a really small club. So I knew that L7 they were just an incredible band. They still are a great live band, and Jennifer in particular, for photography wise, she just she had this like pretty cool bass. She had a clear bass, and she was like barefoot, shorts, hair that was just flinging this hair around, flying everywhere. And I was just trying to get that hair, so I'm like holding the flash. And then if you look at the shot, you can see the smoke is just starting to roll in, and she just like hit that. And I just managed to get all of her hair like up like that, huge. And I went home after that show and developed the negatives, in the bathroom at Positive Forest where I was living at the time, and I could see that, and I was like, oh, I was blown away. I was really happy with that shot. I ended up giving photographs from that show to Bikini Kill and the other bands, and also L7 at the time. And she had seen him and she had loved that photograph and she wanted to get one to her dad, and she wrote me a postcard. And I don't know what happened. I think I somehow managed. I think I got her the shot. I found the postcard recently, a few months ago. Anyways, I always knew that she liked the shot. And then years later, a friend of mine, or this person who does a T-shirt company called Rock and Roll Repeat, they'll take like iconic photographs or music related things, and they make T-shirts out of them. So he loved that photo and he wanted to do a shirt from that photo. So he contacted myself and Jennifer and we agreed to it, and it did pretty well. And just, I mean, things happened so quick with her passing. As soon as we all found out that she had the brain cancer, it's like, I got to, because the shirt was out of print. So we re-released it with Jennifer's blessings and the management and everyone. And it sold quite a lot. And previous to that, when we were promoting it 6 months ago or whenever it was that it first came out, there's a little video and you can see it on there, and Jennifer's talking about the photograph, and she says in the video, she's like, I'm really happy to be doing this shirt. This is my favorite photo ever taken of me, live or whatever. And
wow.
So it's one of my favorite photos too. And I loved it. I didn't know Jennifer. I just knew her through performance and email, and she liked my photograph and I shared it with her. And I know that quite a few shirts were sold to benefit her, and I know that helped a lot and that meant a lot. And we got the okay from her, and we heard from her management or friend that, she couldn't really speak at the end, but she was like smiling and nodding about us redoing the shirt again. And so, that meant a lot to me, and that image means a lot. And then it came together. And then that's, similar things there's with the Bikini Kill photographs. Those photographs they've meant a lot to a lot of people. And I've kept in touch with Kathleen and the band over the years, and the photographs of Bikini Kill have been used and referenced in movies and documentaries, on books and exhibitions. There's a big exhibition in Germany right now where they're in there, and and it's the same sort of thing. And it's just, it means a lot because it's somewhat of why I set out to do it in the first place, which was to show the rest of the world something that I felt like was important and exciting and had energy and need to be considered. And also it was a way for me to be, part of something somehow. And that was like my contribution to it. It's sad to see, we will all die eventually, but I hope that, my record of the time can help educate people or help retain that good memory or that feeling of that moment, so yeah, I'm happy about that. And there's been a lot of, I don't know what I think about it. It was the public kind of mourning of people on social media, and I have mixed feelings about that because it's like, people don't know these people, but their art, the people who die, the art meant a lot. So it's cool that people express themselves and all of that. And I agree with that. I do kind of struggle sometimes with, I know people probably don't mean it, but sometimes posts come off as, look at this person that died was my friend, see? Or, that whole thing is just, I don't know, I try to be respectful. I posted the picture and I talked about my feelings, and I'm not going to go around saying it was, I just said it here, but it's because it just means a lot to me. It's a reminder to us photographers that you just don't know when an image that you made is, photography evolves and it changes over time and it becomes more important. Other people I photograph that I wish I'd photographed more, like I loved Elliott Smith, and I think I have 2 Polaroids of him that I took, and those, they mean a lot, mean everything, so what can you do? So,
yeah.
yeah.
If there's anything else you want to touch on that we didn't talk about, why don't we do that now? And if not, then that seems like a good place to maybe bring it to a close. Where can people find you and your work online, and how can people get your books and support your work?
Yeah, I mean, the best way at the moment is if you go to Instapackgram at Instagram, obviously, Instapackgram. I've got work up there, and if you search me, you'll find a website. I think I've got one. It's funny, I'm saying, I have a website up there, but it's not quite built, but it's there. Most people don't look at websites these days, but find me through the Instapackgram. I'm pretty active on there. You can reach me. My contact details are there. If you do try to contact me through Instagram, I'm not always the best at responding. So be patient. But yeah, if you're coming through Washington, D.C. in the next couple months, be sure to come up and visit at the exhibition and just look out for other things I'm doing. I'm working on a couple different little mini special publications. I've got a book that I owe people that I have not forgotten about that I'm also working on. And there's Johnny Marr has a bunch of guitars that are being auctioned off, and I'm going to be doing a little exhibition to do with that over the next month as well. So keep an eye out for that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing so much useful information and amazing and personal stories too. I really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for listening through. And if you haven't yet done it, please subscribe and like and do all those things for the page. Help get this podcast in front of more people. Once again, thanks a lot, Pat, for joining me.
Thank you, Brad. Really appreciate it.